The builders watched it all in sorrow. Even the peaceful ones engaged in war. Even Lindsay, who hated the warhead more than anyone, even she could fill with the same bestial, mindless rage as any of the soldiers. Even she could charge again and again until her enemy was shattered. Even she could watch him die. And Bud, the one who seemed to be a healer, a builder of connections among people, he approved of all she did. Why? Because coffee made them so afraid, because the fear was so unbearable that they would do anything to destroy whatever made them feel that way. Bud and Lindsay tried to help him, to persuade him, but they gave up, didn't they? In the end, these people are all alike. When they're afraid, they kill, and they will always be afraid. So the builders held back. No more interference. The one who gave breath to Catfish was sent away, sent deep, kept busy with important tasks, but work that had nothing to do with the humans. They watched Coffee fall into the chasm, but they did nothing to help him. Only after he was dead did they move swiftly in and scan his memory to preserve him. We can do that much for these humans who came so far to meet us. When we leave this world, we can take the memory of these wretched, fearful creatures with us. In only a very short time, our memory will be the only place where any of them remain alive. When Lindsay died, the builders noticed a most curious thing. As they sent out tendrils to scan her brain, they themselves were filled with grief. They never grieved for their own who died, as long as their memories had been gathered into the city. Yet Lindsay's memories were being gathered. They were doing it themselves, and still were filled with sorrow. Why? The question circulated quickly throughout the city, and in a far corner it was heard by the builder who had dared to help Catfish make it to the moon pool. She knew the answer, but for a brief time she hesitated to supply it. To venture into this debate again would surely expose her to further censure. But then she remembered Catfish's decision at Hatch 6 to attempt the swim that he knew he could not make. Was she, whose memories could never die, less courageous than he, whose life could be snuffed out, his memories lost? So she offered her answer to the city. We grieve for her as we never grieve for each other, not because her memories will be lost, for they won't. We grieve for her because her independent actions in the world, which were so strange, which no one else would ever have done. For good or ill, those actions will stop. We grieve not for her past, which we will have forever, but for her future, which we will never have. We knew her best of all of them, and so the loss of her future hurts us worst of all, more than the self-destruction of the entire species of humankind. The loss of this one will grieve us. The city listened, and the idea astonished them, and they also thought of something else. This very builder who gave the answer to them had been transformed by knowing these humans, and had acted in a way that was different from what any other builder might have done. What other builder has spoken despite the city's ban? What other builder has ever dared? For which this builder should be taken into the city, remembered, and then dispersed. Isn't that precisely what these humans do? Destroy individuals that make them afraid? She's one of us. She won't be destroyed. She'll be remembered. But we'll also remove the possibility of her acting strangely ever again. And why? Because we fear the change that she has brought to us. We would remove her future influence because we're afraid of it. We have done that again and again in our history. We never thought of it as killing, because no part of their past is lost. But hasn't she shown us that it's just as grievous to cut off an individual's future? It was a strange and terrible idea that they themselves practiced something that resembled killing, and that their motive was also fear. They never acted in the maniac rage these humans showed in battle, but they still did what every other living creature did. They acted against individuals to protect themselves. Until they met these humans, they had never valued individuals, had never really conceived of what true individuality could mean, since they shared memories so freely among themselves that each builder remembered having done what all other builders did. Thus the boundaries between them meant little. Now, though, as Bud Brigman dragged Lindsay's body through the water towards the lights of Deepcore, they finally understood what those boundaries were, and how it was possible to prize one person and mourn her loss. Then her memories began to circulate among the builders of the city. Above all, they were astonished at the moment of her death. She was afraid of death, and yet she had chosen to die herself rather than take breath away from Bud. An angry fear had driven her to kill Coffee, but an even stronger fear remained untinged with anger. Instead, she acted on a stronger feeling, a certainty that Bud would keep her alive. They recognized this feeling. It was the same confidence the builders themselves had when one of them was at the point of destruction of her body, and another builder came and took her memories. "I will live," the feeling said. "I will live in you." And Lindsay meant more by this than the hope that Bud could bring her back to life. She knew that hope was slim compared to the probability of her permanent death. She also knew that even if she died, finally and forever, she would continue to live on in him. Impossible! How could she, when they don't share memories the way we do? Again, a quiet voice proposed an answer to the question to the city, and this time she was joined by most of the other builders who had been close to Deepcore, who had experienced the humans most directly. She knows that she has changed him, and so his future will be colored by our influence as long as he lives. She's part of who he is, and so her influence on the future won't die with her. The city listened, astonished. They examined this answer, and they believed it. Though the process wasn't as clear, as direct as the sharing of memory, it was true. The humans had found a way of living on in someone else's life. "Watch them," the city said. "There still may be some hope for them. By watching them, we still may find some way to undo the harm we've caused them, some way to help these humans save themselves." All the time that Bud came down the cannon, they were watching him. Their tendrils were inside his brain, scanning his memories, interpreting his thoughts, hearing all he heard, feeling all he felt. Why is he coming down to us? He comes because he's afraid. He fears that the warhead will explode. He fears that it will destroy our city. He fears that we'll be angry and punish his people. Then is he a fool? We can destroy this warhead for ourselves. He doesn't know that. We would never harm his people. Not intentionally, but we have harmed them. They're on the verge of war out on the surface of this world, in part because of us. He thinks we're also on the verge of destruction here because of him. He's risking all he is and all he has in order to come undo the terrible thing that Coffee meant to do to us. Who is the nobler creature, then, him or us? What do we put at risk if we save them? We can't save them. Killing is in their hearts, even the best of them. So is fear, and yet they overcome it. You say that fear has brought him down to us? There were also fears that made him hate to come. Fear of personal death, which is more terrible to them than it is to us. His fear of breathing liquid, which is worse in him than any other human that we've seen. His fear of losing her, a fear that we ourselves have tasted. You asked why he's coming down to us. I think I understand. He saw two possible worlds, 1. A world in which he remained alive, but in which a terrible crime would be committed against us, a crime that he might have prevented. The other, a world in which there remained the possibility of peace between us and his people, but in which he himself was dead. This is too simple an explanation. Is it? Then let me show you another, even simpler. I also see two worlds ahead of us. One in which we refuse to change our own behavior, and so we stand by and let these humans destroy each other, forcing us to leave this world behind, dead, when we could have prevented it, when its death is partly our fault. The other is a world in which we change to become a little more like them, in order to have the power to change them to become a little more like us. That's the world that remains alive, with us and these humans sharing it, at peace with each other, at peace within ourselves. I choose the second one. I choose to change ourselves a little in order to save us all. What sort of change do you propose? We've seen how fear controls them, how fear of each other, which we inadvertently help to cause, is leading them to devastating war. Why not, then? Let them see how irresistibly powerful we are compared to them. Why not let them fear our power so much that when we tell them to destroy their nuclear weapons, they'll do it? Fear us? But we would never harm them. Wouldn't we? Haven't you nearly decided to stand back and let them destroy this world? They would be the ones destroying each other, not us, causing harm. Bud Brigman believes this warhead will destroy us, but by your reasoning, it would be Coffee destroying us, not him. Yet he has chosen to act as if Coffee were part of himself, to take responsibility for Coffee's actions, to die in order to undo the harm that Coffee caused. We can't pretend to be innocent if we stand by and let them destroy each other, especially since we're partly to blame for their crisis. No, your madness is confusing you, and you are confusing us. You're speaking as if these humans were as important to us as we are to each other, as if they are our equals, when plainly they're not. They're killers. Didn't you mean to kill me? They're strangers, monstrous, terrible strangers that we can't speak to because they don't even know they're being spoken to. They can never understand us and we can never understand them. They don't matter to us. Why should we change ourselves, betray our nature for them? This is the most important thing the humans have taught me. The thing they're teaching us right now, you see. They are all strangers to each other. They live out their entire lives never truly understanding one another, only making guesses, making mistakes, distorting, deceiving, misunderstanding each other, and yet though they're permanently strangers, they choose sometimes to trust each other, care for each other so completely that they gladly die to let the other live, that they gladly change themselves to make the other person happy. They're so used to this great leap of trust and love that Bud Brigman has extended that some trust to us. And even though he doesn't know us, doesn't understand us, even though we're strangers to him, all I ask is that we treat them as Bud Brigman is treating us. He barely comprehends us, yet values our lives enough to die trying to save us. We understand far more about them, and we don't even have to die to save them. We only have to change a little bit. And then when their nuclear weapons are gone, we benefit as much as they do, because we can remain in peace on this planet. You make it sound as if you think they're better than we are. Well, in some ways they are. In some ways, they're much worse. Humans and builders were different from each other, but we must still value each other in spite of the differences because of this. This is hard. This is very hard. We've never thought like this before. We can't find this in any of our memories, even the oldest ones from the first of all worlds. Then watch Bud Brigman and Lindsay Brigman. They're as separate from each other, as strange to each other, as we are from humans, as humans are from us. See how they do what I think that we should do. Somewhere during Bud's journey down the cliff, as the city watched and listened, a mind that was made up of 10,000 other minds made a decision. The builders began to act. By the time Bud reached the ledge near the bottom of the cliff, instead of his being helpless, his brain destroyed, their tendrils had reached into his brain, into his body, and changed him, restored him, made it possible for him to live in a place where a human could not live. Deep in the abyss of the ocean. They showed him which wire to cut and made him sure of his choice. They filled him with peace at the thought of staying to see the city of strangers, and finally, as the last of the oxygen began to bleed out of his breathing fluid, a builder was sent to him. He sat on the ledge, leaning against the wall of the cliff. He had seen the city of light, and he had saved it. There was more that he would wish to do with his life, but if it had to end now, this was enough. It was worth living. Lindsay loved him. He had accomplished everything that really mattered to him. Now he was tired, and the breathing fluid was no longer replenishing. The liquid oxygen was gone. He closed his eyes. He saw light, moving, getting brighter. He opened his eyes, turned his head to face it. It was an angel, coming toward him in the water, just like Jammer said, bright, glowing, light shifting inside it, two wings arching from its back, sweeping down behind it. And as it came closer, though he saw that they weren't wings and it wasn't an angel, where the body of it should have been, it wasn't human, not even close. What seemed to be wings was a veil, a delicate mantle that billowed as it moved through the water. No, it was rhythmic undulation of the mantle that was propelling it. Its body and limbs were transparent like a figure of blown glass. Its face was inhuman but not repellent. He looked into its eyes and realized that it was beautiful. Bud wasn't afraid. He knew he was seeing an NTI, a visitor from space. Not something it made. Not an artifact or a vehicle, but one of the people of the abyss. He knew that he was safe now, that it was here. Bud reached out his hand in greeting. The NTI reached out an arm to him. The slender, blown glass fingers grasped his bulky glove. The fingers were solid and strong, belying the delicacy of their appearance. But instead of being afraid, instead of feeling imprisoned by the creature's hold on him, Bud felt protected, cared for. He wanted very much to go with this creature, to see everything that it might show him. He didn't wonder any more why he wasn't dead yet. He knew that the coming of this creature, this person, meant that his life wasn't over yet, and he was glad of the delay. The NTI pulled him from the ledge, and then, like Peter Pan taking Wendy on her maiden flight, the NTI drew him through the water, carrying him swiftly over the last sweeping downslopes of the canyon wall. They cruised over rocks and cliffs toward the glow he had seen at the bottom. Suddenly the darkness exploded with light as they cleared the last cliff and saw the whole city open up beneath and before them. It was one vast, symmetrical structure, radiating outward from the center as if it were one living body, one huge machine. Light swept along slender threads that must have been 20 yards thick, yet still looked graceful and delicate. They seemed like highways, but the only travelers were pulses of color. He saw huge spires rising upward in graceful spirals, with arches and webbing and tissue stretched across ribs, like microscopic photographs of delicate internal organs. None of the structures made sense. Where were the highways, the shopping districts, the suburbs, the parks? This city wasn't built for any purpose Bud could understand, but he knew, without comprehension, that it was perfect for its purpose, that not a spire, not a channel, not a ridge or arch or bend was out of place. They swept toward the center, descending as they went, and now Bud could see thousands of creatures moving through the city. They didn't follow the channels or ridges when they all could fly through the dense water at the bottom of the sea. Why would they need roads? There were many like the one who was leading Bud. There were also other shapes, dozens of them, all going about their business with purpose and intelligence. Many of them stopped and touched each other as they passed, not like ants, with their chaotic dance of indecision, constantly touching antennae to discover where they were and what they ought to do, but rather like a city of people who all knew each other so well that they must greet with brief but real affection everyone they pass. The NTI led him toward one of the spires. As they sank down toward its base, he realized how tall it was hundreds of feet high. The closer they got to it, the more detail he could see. Each feature, a rib, an arch, a sweep of wall, was really composed of hundreds of smaller structures that echoed the shapes and patterns of the spire as a whole. And each of those smaller structures were composed of others, smaller still, so that he believed that the entire thing was grown, not built, taking its shape naturally from the myriad forms within it. Even the buildings are alive, he thought. The whole city is alive. They approached one of the large openings. It was not an archway. It opened in so smooth and gradual a curve that it was impossible to tell the moment when you stopped being outside and started being inside its yawning mouth. Instead of slowing as they came near, the NTI accelerated as if they had been caught in a current, like blood cells being swept through the veins toward the heart. Inside, they rushed through a curving, three-dimensional maze of tunnels, not dark and foreboding, but full of light and life, a safe place, a place of memory. There was so much of it that Bud gave up trying to make sense of the route they were taking, of the things he saw. Lindsay would understand this. Lindsay would figure out what all these structures are for, what each of these creatures or machines we pass are doing. All I can do is witness it, see it without understanding. That's enough for me right now. When they want me to understand, when I need to understand, they'll speak to me. Tunnels divided. They followed narrow tubes, turning at startling speed, then abruptly moved out into main thoroughfares, hundreds of feet across, crowded with NTIs of every description. Finally, though, they came to a smaller chamber where they settled on the floor. The NTI let go of his hand then and floated back a few feet. Bud found that he missed having the NTI's hand in his. The flight had been exhilarating, but now his feet were on the ground again, and he was alone, touching no one. He wasn't afraid, but he felt solitary, weak, insufficient. For whatever they meant to do with him, he was also physically weak, still exhausted. He didn't stand, but half lay, half sat on the floor of the room, straddling a recessed oval on the floor, whose purpose he couldn't begin to guess. A shimmering division appeared in the water, bisecting the chamber they were in, like an almost invisible curtain. Then the one curtain became two, drawing apart wider and wider, and between them there was no water. It was the parting of the Red Sea, only smoothly, as if the sea had been sliced by a laser beam. It passed over his head, his body, and beyond him. At the end, Bud found himself sitting in a short, shimmering hallway between two walls of water, 20,000 feet under the Caribbean Sea. He was dripping wet in a pocket of air. For a moment, he didn't understand why they should do this. Then he did. If they wanted him to talk with them, then he needed to be breathing air. For a moment he worried that they might not know how to create a breathing mix that wouldn't kill him at this depth, at this pressure, but almost at once the fear subsided. Of course they knew. They would not be careless with his life. He reached up, uncoupled his helmet, and pulled it free. The breathing fluid splashed out. It hadn't occurred to him that it would be no easier to quit breathing fluid than it had been to start. He bent over, his body racked by spasms as fluid exploded from his lungs. He thought, no wonder babies cry when they have to give up the water of the womb and start breathing fire. Finally, he lay gasping and coughing on the floor, dragging in deep, painful breaths of air. In a short time, though, he recovered enough to sit up to look around. Behind the shimmering curtain of water, he could see the NTI who brought him being joined by others, all of the same general appearance. He couldn't tell them apart except to count that there were 7 of them. Their inhumanness was so powerful that he couldn't have noticed any individual differences, if they had any. What were they waiting for? Perhaps for him to show that he could speak now? So he spoke. Howdy. Then he realized that was too informal. These guys might be ambassadors or government people or something, so he tried again. How you guys doing? His voice echoed metallically in the room. He could hear a soft lapping of water from the walls. Then the water wall before him there appeared a pattern of glowing horizontal lines, with colored dots appearing at random along each line. Then the patterns resolved themselves. They were the horizontal lines of a raster screen. He was watching a 20-foot TV. You watch our TV? Is that what you're trying to say? That you know what's been going on up there? It was the solution they had finally come up with to the problem of how to talk to a human, so he'd know that the builders were talking to him, and he'd understand what they were saying. Humans used television to talk to each other. The builders could use the same television programs to communicate with Bud Brigman. When they could see in his mind that he understood them, they'd release the chemicals in his brain that gave him a feeling of certainty. It was the best combination of human and builder speech that they could think of. Recorded in the vast memory of the city, where every frame of every television broadcast that their gliders had received as they passed back and forth between space and the sea, but it was current broadcasts they wanted Bud to see. They had to show him the action that they had finally decided to take, so that he could go back and explain it to the rest of humanity. It was not enough to act. They had tried that before when a builder destroyed a potentially deadly satellite, and it led to exactly the sort of trouble the builder had been hoping to prevent. Their actions had to be clearly identified as coming from the builders, not any group of humans, and their purpose had to be explained and understood. Since Bud and Lindsay had been at the heart of their decision, it seemed only right that he be the messenger to explain them to the humans at the surface of the world. What they were doing had a simple goal: to show humanity that the builders existed, that they had irresistible power, that if they had wanted to, they could devastate and slaughter at will. It was important that the demonstration be worldwide. So the builders had carried the memory of all their decision-making to every other city of builders. Having received a complete memory of the city's experiences with the humans of Deep Core, they reacted as if they had all gone through the same process and reached the same decision. They couldn't bring all of humanity out to the ocean to see their power in the place where they lived. So, together, they set out to take the ocean to the humans. A wave. A tsunami. Rising out of the ocean for no discernible cause, a huge, continuous wave surrounding every inhabited continent. The technology to produce and control the wave was simple enough for the builders, but the energy cost was enormous. They tapped the vast reserves of geothermal energy drew enough heat from the ocean and the atmosphere to offset the greenhouse effect. They used far more energy to create this demonstration than all the energy released by human beings throughout human history. All the wood fires, all the coal furnaces, all the oil and gas, all the nuclear reactors had not produced enough energy to duplicate what the builders could do with only a few minutes' notice, acting together in perfect unity. They showed Bud the news reports, baffled, scientists being interviewed about the approaching wave. No, we don't know what caused it. We don't know how to stop it, but we do know what it will do. A half-mile high wall of water striking every coastline in the world? It will utterly destroy everything in its path for miles and miles inland. No, there's no point in evacuating coastal areas. If you're close enough to be threatened, you have no hope of getting away in time. Most people in the world live within the threatened area. It will be a far worse disaster than any plague or war. The whole fabric of human civilization will be unwoven in the aftermath. And interviews with common people, terrified as much by the impossibility of what was happening as by the physical danger of it. What could you count on in the world if the sea could suddenly rise up and attack the land for no reason? No pictures of the wave itself? Not yet. It was moving too fast for that. The news of it had come from radio reports from airplanes or from ships that radioed in panic and then fell silent. But it was coming. It would be visible from the shore in a minute or two. Bud listened to the news. He realized at once what was causing the wave. You're doing it, right? That's what you're telling me? Yeah, you can control water. That's your technology. But why? Yes, he knew the question. That's why they had brought him here, to tell him why. The huge television screen went blank, then came to life again, not with current news now, but with old broadcasts, a brilliant flash of light, and then the mushroom cloud rising, the same film, repeated again and again, faster and faster, until the whole thing merged into an unbroken white glare. Bud thought of the news reports they had been getting while the explorer was still with them. The nuclear powers on the verge of war. Hey, you don't know they're really going to do it. Where do you get off passing judgment on us when you can't be sure? How do you know? The screen exploded with searing images of cruelty and killing. U.S. soldiers in Vietnam, Afghan children with limbs blown off by Russian toy bombs, a car bomb in Belfast, street fighting in Beirut, corpses being bulldozed into mass graves at Auschwitz, a picture of humanity that sickened Bud. An indictment, a condemnation. Bud understood what they were saying. Not that humanity was pure evil and deserved to die. Quite the opposite. They were answering his specific question: how do you know that the superpowers are really going to launch a nuclear war? The answer? When has an act of war ever been so terrible, so monstrous, so self-defeating that no nation on earth was willing to do it? The NTIs knew that this time the threat of annihilation was real. The wave was designed to prevent it. Still, Bud refused to believe that it was right to destroy half of humanity like this, with only a few minutes' warning, with no chance to realize their mistake, to change. On a cosmic scale, perhaps it might be right to kill so many in order to keep humanity from killing everyone, but to carry out such an act would be a monstrous one in itself. Have you no compassion for the people you're about to kill? Their answer was to fill the screen again with the present broadcast. The wave was visible now from shore. Television cameras on the beaches were showing its approach. It didn't look that large at first until the reporters mentioned how far away it was. And as Bud watched, the wave grew and grew to enormous heights and beyond. It was unbearable to watch this, to hear it. And then, suddenly, it was silent. 2,500 feet high, the wall of water had come to a halt. Held up by invisible, unguessable forces, it loomed all along the coastlines of the world, ready to come crashing down, ready to destroy, but for now, waiting. The force that could create the wave was already terrifying to imagine, but the force that could stop the wave, keep it in place, build trillions of tons of water into a structure as stable as a stone pyramid, the world looked at the wave, dwarfing all the works of man, and were at once terrified and awed. The point was made. Their power had been shown. Most of humanity had witnessed it, in person or on television. They would not forget. The wave soundlessly subsided, its work done. The water was released gently on the seaward side until the ocean returned to its normal level, and breakers of reasonable size once again rolled in to the undamaged shore. Bud looked at the builders, trying to understand. Why? You could have done it. Why didn't you? The screen went dark. Then letters began to appear on it, slowly printing out as if someone was clumsily typing them. Knew this was one-way ticket, but you know I had to come. Love you, wife. Bud didn't understand. How could the words he wrote to Lindsay be the reason why humanity was spared? He looked at them, puzzled, questioning. In answer, the builders bowed their heads before him, just for a moment. A gesture of respect to their teacher. The builders knew that Bud's word alone might be disregarded. The ark rose up, lifting deep core with it, straight to the surface, and as it rose it also picked up the Explorer and lifted it out of the water, and the Navy destroyer Albany and several other ships. The water rushed off the top of the ark like a circular Niagara, flowing out to the edges, and there they rested high and dry, the ships all dwarfed by the spires of memory that ringed the ark. For the second time, we opened the lockout hatch of Trimodal Sea. This time, though, it didn't lead into the frozen water of the deep. This time it was air, with a stiff drop down to the hard, dry surface of the ark. Catfish went first, but soon we all joined him, standing there in daylight, released at last from the darkness of the bottom of the sea. We should be dead, said Lindsay. We didn't decompress. They must have done something to us to release the pressure, said Hippie. Oh yes, said Lindsay. I think you can say that. Done something to us? We have all been touched by them, and changed in more ways than I can name. Those of us who stayed with them have been changed the most of all. They can take us from our atmosphere into the deep and back again without harm to our own bodies. We can breathe in their underwater city without equipment of any kind. But these are commonplace miracles to us now. The one that always astonishes me is the gift of memory. They've taught us how to sense the difference between our own thoughts and the ones they give to us. And we can understand their speech. And they've given us the memories of the people that they scanned, the living and the dead. I've been filled with them. I've lived out their lives from the inside. I've known all their desires, all their fears. Barnes and Kretschmer from the Matana, Russian sailors who drowned in the storm, the crewmen who died on Deep Core, and all the ones who lived as well. I have been Bud as he slipped down the cliff in his memory. I have been Lindsay as she drowned before she was brought back to life. I have felt their love for each other, and they have seen every secret in my heart. One Night, Jammer, Catfish, Hippie, Sunny, I know them as no other human being have ever known each other, and they know me, and I hold within me the members of my team. The builders have changed us, because they had to have ambassadors between our worlds, but they won't change any others. They want humanity to remain human as much as possible. And you don't want to go through all that we've experienced. Sometimes I wake up so full of other men's and women's dreams that I have to struggle to remember who I am. Sometimes the dead are so present in me that I feel possessed by other people's souls. And yet I wouldn't lose those memories even if I could. They are alive in me. I wouldn't wish them dead again. I wouldn't wish them lost to me, because I have learned from the builders what it means to be alive and human. I've learned why it is that people do the things we do. I've learned how other lives are from the inside, and now I've tried to pass it on to you, not in the purity with which the builders share memory. That isn't the human way. Still, in these pages, I've done my best to give you these memories that will show you what we did and why we did it. We who were down there when builders and humans met and changed each other for all time.